Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this morning's training entitled Introduction to HR Auditing. I am your presenter today, Andrew Ondari. HR auditing has become one of the most important elements in the functioning of HR departments, and by extension, effectiveness of the HR department. As HR managers, we need to ensure that our policies, our processes, and practices are not only effective, but also efficient. Given that we operate in a dynamic environment, HR auditing has become very important because they ensure that our policies, processes, systems, and procedures are working. To audit the HR function basically means taking a health check of our organizations. A healthy HR function is one that ensures employees are engaged, the organization is achieving its objectives, and that the organization is attracting and retaining top talent. So when we audit the HR function, we are checking how healthy the policies, the practices, the systems and procedures are. It is important to audit HR because we align ourselves not only with the industry standards, but also with our own policies, strategies, and the systems. With that in mind, we are able to ensure that our department is working very well and that we are achieving our objectives. In that regard, we need to ensure that we conduct this process in a systematic and effective way. As we shall mention in the next few minutes, we will be able to see how we can conduct this in a systematic way to achieve our organizational objectives. Having said that, I want us to go to the themes that inform our discussion today. There are three areas that we are going to cover in the next 3 hours or so. One is the HR audit fundamentals, which is basically an introduction to HR audit. In this introduction, we are going to look at the concept of HR audit, why we conduct this audit, briefly the process of conducting that audit, the process, and ultimately the value we are going to get from this audit. Secondly, we are going to look at the audit process life cycle. That HR auditing is a continuous process. It never comes to an end. It starts with planning and ends with monitoring and evaluation, which helps to identify either new gaps or weaknesses that need to be improved, and the process begins again. And lastly, we will be looking at the audit roles and ethics. By audit roles, we are looking at two things. One, the responsibilities of different stakeholders in this process. For example, the HR manager, what are his or her role? Two, the audit team, what will they be looking for? 3, the top managers, what will be their role? And lastly, the employees, what will they be responsible for during the audit process? Then talking of ethics, these are standards of behavior which are expected of everybody. So we shall be looking at the universal ethical standards that should guide the HR audit process. To start with, let us look at the HR audit fundamentals. And I will be discussing the highlighted points for the purpose of understanding. By definition, I've said that HR audit is a systematic process, which is also objective. And what does it involve? It involves a review or an evaluation of HR policies, procedures, practices, and systems. Allow me to start with the systematic and objective review. When we talk of systematic, we mean that it is a step-by-step method of collecting, analyzing, interpreting data, and making recommendations with respect to the various functions of HR. When the process is systematic, it eliminates unpredictability, that everybody knows what to expect next. So in that way, we are able to achieve our objectives because there is no confusion in this process. Speaking of objectivity, that when we conduct HR audits, we are not going to be biased. Biased people are those who use their own opinions or their own perspectives to make judgments. As HR managers, our decisions must be based on hard data. So for us to be objective in this process, we need to be objective. One, that our decisions are based on collected data, and 2, they are based on best practices that have been proved to be working, not only in the country, for example, but also elsewhere in the world. And that's why we talk of best practices. This process will review HR policies. I believe all our organizations have policies that guide our decisions. These are guidelines or principles that enable us to function effectively as HR managers. And all our decisions are based on these policies. In our organizations, there are many types of policies, depending on the department, but specifically to the HR department, there are policies related to 1, recruitment and selection, 2, training and development, 3, performance management, 4, employee discipline, 5 is reward and compensation, among other areas. So when we have clear policies, we are able to make decisions that are not only fair, but also help to ensure consistency in the way we perform our tasks. Procedures are step-by-step ways of doing things. And these are methods that we use, for example, in conducting certain tasks. There are various tasks that we perform as HR managers. For example, onboarding. there should be a procedure on onboarding, a step-by-step method. Another task that is governed by procedure is recruitment. What are the steps that we follow in recruitment and selection? May talk about, for example, the procedure of job design. One is to identify the job. 2, collect data about the job. 3, analyze the data. 4, develop job descriptions. And 5, develop job specifications and person specifications. That becomes a procedure in job analysis. And therefore, when we are auditing these procedures, we want to find out how effective they are, meaning that they should be producing the results that we desire. Practices are norms, things that we do on a daily basis, weekly or monthly. In HR practice, there are many sub-practices within it. For example, training. That before we take anyone for any training, the practice is that we conduct a training needs analysis. So in HR audit, we will look at these practices to find out whether they are giving us the results. Other practices related to HR include salary surveys. That when we conduct salary surveys, we are able to develop a salary structure that is internally equitable and externally competitive. Such a practice should be promoted in our organizations. Why? Because 1, we are able to attract top talent, and 2, we are able to retain those employees. So when we are auditing, we will be looking at how those practices are working for us. If there are any gaps, we bridge them. If there are any weaknesses, we strengthen them. And lastly, is systems. These are interrelated parts that work together to achieve an objective. In HR, there are many systems that we need to audit to assess their effectiveness. One is the performance management system. How does it work? Does it give us the results? Are they aligned with the corporate objectives? Another system could be training system. For example, those of us who have automated their systems in training, you are talking about LMS, that is learning management system. So again, we audit this system to find out whether it is working, and if it is working, what is the problem, and then how the problem can be solved. What is the focus of HR audit? Quite a number of aspects are focused here. Number 1 is effectiveness. Effectiveness has to do with outcomes or outputs or results. That when we look at HR policies, procedures, practices, and systems, they should produce results. For example, we talk of HR policy effectiveness. An effective policy is one that is fair, is one that helps us to make informed decisions. That if the policy does not provide these guidelines, then it is not fair and it does not make us make good decisions. Secondly, is about compliance. HR audit focuses on adherence to various internal and external standards. I can mention a number of aspects that these policies and procedures must comply with. One, compliance with our own policies and strategy. That if we are recruiting people, the procedures and practices must be compliant with our own policies. What does the policy require? Another area of compliance is strategic objectives. And this is where we talk about alignment. For instance, we want to train people. Is this training aligned with the corporate objectives and strategy? If there's no alignment, then we achieve what they call a strategic drift. Thirdly, on compliance, we are talking about labor laws and regulations. Shortly, I'll be talking about types of HR audits where compliance is one of them. And the compliance with the labor law is not an option, but a must. If we want to avoid, one, penalties, two, lawsuits, and three, fines. So we check compliance to ensure that we adhere to the labor laws and the regulations. On alignment, that our HR policies, practices, and procedures must be connected to the corporate objectives, connected. If there is no connection, then we are not assisting our organizations to achieve its objectives. For example, starting with recruitment. When we recruit, the policy procedures must be aligned with corporate objectives. I can give an example. So the question is, how do we ensure that one, we should ensure that we recruit quality people so that they can be aligned with that growth. Because when we bring on board high quality talent, then we are likely to achieve a competitive advantage and also grow into the markets that we intend to. HR audit also covers the scope. Scope are the areas that are covered in the HR audit. Essentially, all the HR functions must be covered in this audit. I can mention the key functions that should be covered. One, recruitment and selection. Two, training and development. Three, performance management. Four, compensation and reward management. Five, employee relations. And lastly, health and safety. These are the functions that should be covered when you are talking about functional audit. And shortly, we are going to look at this so that we can see how we can conduct a functional audit. What is the frequency of conducting HR audits? As I've indicated, it can be periodic. Periodic can mean monthly, quarterly, biannually, or annually. Because it's a rigorous process, which requires a lot of time and contributions from different stakeholders, we cannot conduct this audit weekly. Neither can we do it monthly or even quarterly. For us to get the best results and also to allow for implementation of the recommendations arising from this audit, we can do it biannually or annually. Because we know that implementation of recommendations sometimes takes a long time, and that is why we should allow ourselves enough time to conduct these audits. So periodic HR audits, like annually, can be one of the best practices in conducting this audit. And when you talk of annually, I am aware of organizations that conduct other audits internally. So what is going to happen with this HR audit? We are going to align it with the annual internal audit for several reasons. One, to ensure that we are working as a team, and two, to avoid any frictions, or three, to avoid duplications. In some cases, we can conduct these HR audits either at the beginning of the year, or for public sector organizations, your year ends in June, and therefore the cycle begins in July. So it's expected that for public entities, the frequency could be annually, probably before the end of June of every year. Alternatively, this audit can be triggered by changes in an organization. For example, there could be a structural change or a change in strategy. A structural change may mean that either we downsize or we delay. That suggests that some employees may have to exit the organization. Others may have to be moved to other departments or sections. When such a change happens, we need to audit the HR function to find out, one, that we have adequate employees to perform the jobs after delayering. Two, that employees are occupying the right positions for which they were hired. And three, whether there are any excess staff who may have to be let go. So the frequency will vary depending on, one, your policy on HR audit, which I believe you will develop, or two, it can be triggered by a change in the organization, such as a structural change or change in strategy. Then what is the end result of HR audit? Several things may come out of this audit. One, risk identification. Why do we need to identify risks? It is because risks present liabilities which can harm the organization in many ways. It may lead to losses of finance, may lead to losses of employees, or may lead to damage of company reputation. Such risks should be identified early enough so that we take corrective measures. Secondly, we will identify gaps. Gaps relate to aspects that may not exist, but required for effective functioning. For example, in training and development, a gap may be lack of training needs analysis, lack of. That if organizations do not conduct TNAs, then their training initiatives may not achieve their objectives. Why? Because the training is not geared toward bridging of a performance gap. And that is why we need to conduct a HR audit to identify gaps in any of the functions that we perform. I've mentioned some of the functions like recruitment, there could be gaps. And one gap could be lack of job analysis. In training, there could be a gap. And the gap could be lack of training needs analysis. In performance management, there could be a gap. And this gap, lack of clear KPIs. In employee compensation and rewards, there could be a gap. And this gap could be lack of salary surveys and many other gaps. So when we conduct HR audits, we are likely to identify these gaps and then recommend the way forward. Then talking of opportunities, these are areas of improvement for purposes of one, ensuring that the HR department performs, and two, helping the organization to achieve its objectives. So when we conduct our HR audit, we identify opportunities for improvement, and two, opportunities for growth. So basically, that is our introduction to HR audit. Next is the factors that have led to the emergence of HR audit. Why has HR audit emerged to be an important aspect in the HR department or in organizations? There are quite a number of factors. One is legal and regulatory compliance. We are all aware that the legal environment changes from time to time. For example, in the Kenyan situation, quite a number of labor laws have changed and others have been introduced for purposes of ensuring that we manage the relationship between employees and employers effectively. So labor laws are there to regulate employee-employer relations. Quite a number of them, and I will mention this under compliance audit. There are quite a number of these laws that have been introduced. For example, SHA, which requires that we deduct our employees at source their SHA contributions. And there are a myriad of other laws that have been introduced that make HR audit necessary. Because for us to comply, we need to map our HR policies, practices, and systems to the legal requirements. For example, in recruitment, we must map our practices and policies with the Employment Act, for example, or with the Work Injury and Benefits Act, or Occupational Safety and Health Act. These acts provide certain requirements that all employers and employees must comply with. So because of the complexity of these legal and regulatory requirements, we need to continuously audit our HR functions to ensure full compliance. We know the repercussions of not complying. I have already mentioned some, and it doesn't break a bone to repeat. One, lawsuits, which take a long time. Two, penalties, which may even mean closure of our organizations. Three, fines, paying money to employees, either as compensation or to regulatory bodies such as ODPC. ODPC means Office of the Data Protection Commission for non-compliance. These are costs that we can easily avoid if we can conduct compliance audits with respect to legal and regulatory compliance. So complexities in our legal and regulatory system may require that we conduct HR audits. Secondly, is the strategic role of HR managers. The HR role has changed over time from being an administrative and operational role to being a strategic partner. And being a strategic and business partner requires that we do things that will add value to the organization in terms of, one, attainment of organizational objectives and strategy, and secondly, being competitive in the market. So as HR managers, our role has changed over time. And as strategic managers, what comes to mind? Several things. One, mission. Two, vision. Three, corporate objectives. So what is it that we can do in order to achieve the mission, vision, and the corporate objectives? One is to ensure succession planning. That when we prepare succession plans, we ensure continuity. Secondly is innovation. That as strategic managers, we must always think matters innovation. That when we bring on board new staff, we bring innovators. When we train people, we train them on innovation. When we assess people in performance management, we assess innovation. And when we retain people, we retain innovators. So if innovation is one of the strategic roles, then when auditing our HR function, we should focus on that key aspect of innovation, because innovation helps organizations to achieve its objectives and also to be competitive in the market. Another aspect that has led to the emergence of HR audit is globalization. They say that we all operate in a global village. In a global village, we know and can network with almost everybody in that village. How has the world become a global village? It is because we can network or get in touch with anybody in this village. What has facilitated this growth of globalization or networking? Three things. One, technology. Two, communication. And three, transport. that a combination of these three has made the world to be like a village where people are networked and know each other. In terms of HR audit, what are the implications of this global pressure? One is about the cultural practices of other people or other organizations in other countries. For organizations that operate internationally, we recruit people from the international market so that we can remain competitive. And when we bring these people on board, there are aspects of differences in culture and diversity. And therefore, when we conduct HR audits, we not only act locally, but think globally. That whatever happens outside our countries may also affect our operations in Kenya, for example. So companies are under pressure, one, to identify best practices around the globe, two, to compete successfully with other players in this global market, and three, ensure that our workforce reflect the diversity of a global organization. When we audit, therefore, we need to think of what is happening elsewhere in the world that we can borrow as a best practice and implement. Another factor is technological advancement. Today, we talk about several types of technologies. For example, artificial intelligence, two, digital technology, and three, software development. As HR managers, we use technological tools to collect, store, share, and utilize data. As we will see in the process of HR auditing, technology can be used to capture knowledge or data. And we can also use this technology to share that data or utilize it. And therefore, as we do HR audit, we should be aware of the technological changes around us. For instance, today we use AI to conduct salary surveys, to onboard employees, and also to train our staff. And therefore, we should audit our HR systems like LMS to ensure that they are efficient and effective. Lastly is the element of risk. There are many risks that we are exposed to as HR managers on a regular basis. For example, the risk of hiring the wrong person. Two, the risk of training people without training needs analysis. The risk of losing employees because of certain internal factors. And also the risk of losing our brand image because of certain practices. And therefore, as HR managers, we should be able to identify risks in recruitment, in training, in performance management, and even in compensation, and take mitigating measures or mitigation measures. And therefore, the increasing legal, financial, and reputational factors have led to the need to continuously audit our HR function so that we can identify these risks that expose us to liabilities. So, ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the factors that have led to the emergence of HR audits globally. Before we take a short break, I want us to look at the next slide, which is the types of HR audits. Types of HR audits. As I indicated earlier, there are several types of HR audits that we can conduct. One is the, sorry, my computer is hanging. Compliance audit. On compliance audit, as I've just indicated, has to do with the level of adherence to the labor laws, internal policies, as well as industry standards. Labor laws are many, and I can mention some of them. One, the Employment Act. Two, the Labor Relations Act. Three, the Labor Institutions Act. Four, Work Injuries and Benefits Act. Five, Occupational Safety and Health Act. As we should comply with all these acts. And therefore, we should regularly review the level of compliance with all these labor laws. We all know that if we don't comply, there are consequences. Consequences of being fined, or consequences of lawsuits, and in some cases, even jail terms, if any one of us is found to be culpable. HR audits, therefore, in terms of compliance, reviews how compliant we are with all the labor laws I've mentioned, among others. Secondly, I've mentioned internal policies, that all our HR functions are regulated or guided by policies. These are guidelines in relation to the HR functions. I'm sure all of us, unless you are a startup, have a policy on recruitment and selection. 2, performance management. 3, training and development. 4, compensation and reward management. 5, discipline. 6, communication. And lastly, health. Any person who is not compliant with this policy or policies is guilty of an offense, and the disciplinary actions can be taken against him or her. So those policies must be complied with. In public sector organizations, non-compliance with HR policies and even laws may lead to audit queries, where you are called to explain why you did not comply with the law as it is or with your own policies. And then lastly, I mentioned compliance with international standards. These are laws and regulations that govern employment relationships elsewhere in the industry. For example, the law on waste management. There are bodies that regulate waste management, for example, NEMA, that if for some strange reason we fail to dispose our waste in designated places, then NEMA will take action. And NEMA has several regulatories on pollution, on waste management. Other regulatory bodies include Kenya Bureau of Standards, that for us to ensure that the products we offer to the market are of high quality and safe, they must go through tests. And these tests are done by Kenya Bureau of Standards. So that becomes an industry standard, which we must comply with as we do audits. And then lastly, an industry audit has to do with ILO conventions. Countries that subscribe to ILO conventions have developed laws that comply with those conventions. And locally at the organizational level, we must develop policies that are in compliance with ILO conventions, especially convention number 87 and convention number 98. These conventions are agreements or treaties that governments have entered into with ILO, which is a unit within the UN. These conventions touch on factors like freedom of association, freedom of expression, and human rights. Speaking of human rights, we should treat everybody as human beings, especially right to life. Nobody should eliminate somebody. And even in our policies, we all have a right to life. And that is why we have various policies that protect our life, and one of which is work injuries and benefits policies or occupational safety and health policies. That we should be careful not to lose lives either through accidents or through illnesses. And that's aligned with the ILO Convention on the right to life. Right of assembly, right of association are all captured under the Labor Institutions Act, where employees have a right to join trade unions. And if in a HR audit you find that employees are not allowed to join a trade union, then that becomes an uncompliant issue. Secondly, we are talking about strategic audit. This examines how our HR policies, processes, and systems are connected with the attainment of business goals. Recruitment and selection should be aligned or connected with business strategy. Training should be connected, performance management connected, among others. For example, if a business strategy for this year is to bring on board 2 innovations in the products of the organization, 2 innovations. As HR managers, what does this imply? One, when we are recruiting new staff, we should look for those potential innovators to achieve that strategy. So we should evaluate new employees based on their ability to innovate. Secondly, we can talk of innovation in training and development. That when we train our employees, we want them to innovate. And that is why we take our potential innovators for external training programs. For example, in Europe, in East Africa, where there are such skills, or even in China, so that they can acquire these new skills and knowledge which are innovative to achieve that innovation at the end of the year. In compensation and reward management, we can still tie that to innovation. How? That we reward those innovators so that one, we are able to attract new innovators, and two, retain current innovators through reward and compensation. So most of the functions that we perform should be related or connected to business strategy. So as we do HR audit, we should also try to align it with the business strategy. Thirdly is the functional audit, which falls squarely within our role as HR managers. I have mentioned several functions that should be audited and should form the scope of our audit. And allow me to repeat, you audit: 1, recruitment and selection; 2, audit performance management; 3, audit training and development; 4, audit compensation and rewards; 5, audit health and safety; and 6, audit employee relations. And we are looking at how well we are doing in all those functions. Are we achieving the results from each of those functions? Starting with the recruitment, the intention of any recruitment activity is to bring on board a qualified employee to perform the work allocated to them. So the recruitment process must give us that person who is a performer. So where do we start with the audit? The requisition process of the vacant positions. How is it done? Because we go to the root cause of where things can go wrong. 2, we audit job analysis. 3, we audit approvals of the vacant positions. 4, we audit advertisements. Where do we place our advertisements, and how do they help us to get that right person? 4, we audit shortlisting. What systems are we using to shortlist? Because if we don't shortlist the right person, then we end up with the wrong person on the job. 5, we audit selection, which starts with interviews. What are our interviews like? Do we use only one type of interview or several types of interviews? And then we also audit in recruitment the selection criteria. Who is this person who is finally selected to be placed on the job? We also audit placement. Do we place people on the right jobs for which they qualify? And lastly, we audit onboarding. So we audit the all processes involved in recruitment and selection, in training and development, in performance management, in employee relations, among others. Functional audit should be the focus of this auditing process, and then align them with compliance and with strategic audits. And this is where we have all the details about the efficiency, effectiveness, and objectivity of the policies, processes, systems, and procedures related to all the functions. And then another audit is a cultural audit, where we are evaluating three things. One, the values. Two, norms. And three, beliefs. I will start with the values. These are the things that we consider to be important for success. And from our core values, we are able to determine whether our processes, systems, and policies are aligned with these values. In most of our organizations, we have values like 1, customer care. 2, transparency. 3, innovation. And 4, professionalism. Those are values, aspects we consider to be important for success and which guide the behavior of everyone in the organization. If I may pick a value like transparency and then try to map it with the HR functions, for example, recruitment and selection. When we are recruiting new employees or existing ones, we should be transparent. So how do we ensure transparency as a value? One, we should communicate the vacant positions to everybody. So communication as a practice becomes a value adding factor so that we can promote transparency. Transparency can also be demonstrated in the shortlisting. That when we shortlist, we use an objective criteria to ensure transparency. When we interview people, we must be transparent as a value. How? By ensuring that we develop interview questions and ask those questions to everybody. That is also the spirit of transparency. Even when we are selecting the final employees, we should be transparent. Transparent in the sense that we select a person based on merit and performance. How did they perform in the interview? So that the best person in the interview is the one that is selected. And this value of transparency can apply to all other functions, including training. So where does transparency come in training? It comes at the point we are conducting training needs analysis, so that only those people with performance gaps or with training needs are taken for training. That is transparency. And that is a value we should promote as HR auditors when we look at all the HR functions. Secondly, we are looking at norms. Norms are practices, things that we do on a daily basis, which are taken as standard behaviors. For example, in performance management, it is a norm or a practice to set clear objectives and KPIs. At what point do people set these objectives or even their own targets? At the beginning of the year, when the performance management cycle begins. So individuals are asked to present to their supervisors their targets for the year and how they will achieve them. That is a practice or a norm. And this is what we evaluate at the end of our process. In compensation and reward, there are other norms. And one of the norms is to conduct salary surveys. Why do we conduct salary surveys? One, to determine the level of satisfaction of employees with salaries and benefits. Two, we conduct surveys to identify best practices in the industry. So salary surveys are norms or practices in compensation and rewards. And we can apply these norms in all the functions. And as you remember, we mentioned that we evaluate or review 5 things. 1, policies. 2, processes. 3, procedures. 4, systems. And 5, practices. Emphasize practices because these are norms. Are these practices working for us? If they are not, then we can change them. And by changing these practices, we shall have changed our culture. Lastly, we have beliefs and a cultural audit. These are assumptions about realities in organizations. I repeat, these are assumptions about realities in an organization. It is about what we consider to be the truth. And there are many truths related to the HR functions. I will start with the recruitment. What is the belief or truth about recruitment? One, if we are transparent in our recruitment process, the truth is we shall get the best employee. That becomes a belief. Still on recruitment and selection, if we onboard our employees effectively, the belief or the truth is we shall build our brand image and we shall prepare employees to function effectively to expected standards. So those are beliefs related to recruitment. How about training? The belief in training is that evaluation of training helps to improve the next training initiatives. Training evaluations. It is therefore believed that if you evaluate trainings, you will improve your next trainings. How about compensation? It is believed that internally equitable and externally competitive compensation motivates and retains people. So it is also a belief. And there are other beliefs, even in health and safety. That in health and safety, the belief is that a conducive work environment leads to better or higher performance. That is a belief. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you conduct a cultural audit, you are looking at the values, the norms, and beliefs related to recruitment, training, performance management, compensation, health and safety, as well as employee relations. And then the last type of HR audit is best practice audit. A best practice is a standard or a system or even a practice that has been tested, researched, and proved to be working. Tested, researched, and proved to be working. That is a best practice. And we all want to embrace best practices because they have been tested, they have been researched on, and they are working. And we look at best practices in all the HR functions. Best practices in recruitment, best practice in training, best practice in performance, best practice in employee discipline, and other functions. For example, in recruitment and selection, the emerging best practice is to automate the process. And which system do you use? You use ATS, Automated Tracking System. That is a best practice. Why is it a best practice? Because one, it is objective, that we get to interview and hire people objectively. Two, it is accurate, that unlike humans who can make mistakes, technology does not. And again, this depends on how it is configured. So through the use of ATS, we are able to shortlist the most qualified candidate based on the criteria we set. Two, we are able to track the application process. Three, we are able to onboard people using these systems. In training and development, the best practice is to evaluate return on investment of training by evaluating the training itself. And when you evaluate the training, we are looking at 4 things. 1, learning. 2, behaviors. 3, results. And 4, reactions. And why do we evaluate training? To ensure that it has achieved its objectives, particularly on the results, and 2, learning. That employees must produce the results intended after training. And 2, they must transfer learning, that is skills and knowledge, from the learning center to the work environment. Unless there is that transfer, then training has failed. So as a best practice, we should evaluate the effectiveness of our training programs. How about health and safety? What is the best practice? Is to ensure that we do inspections. And who does the inspections? It is the Health and Safety Committee. So in health and safety, as a best practice, we conduct inspections. Inspections of what? I can mention 4 things. 1, the offices or workstations of employees. Are they healthy and safe? 2, inspect the fire extinguishers. Are they working? Are they serviced? And are they used in the right way? Are they located in the right positions? 3, in health and safety, we inspect the washrooms and other hygienic places. We should inspect. Why should we inspect? To ensure that they are clean and safe, so that they do not become risky in terms of diseases or illnesses. We also inspect the general working environment as a best practice. So best practices are important because 1, they enable us to compare ourselves with what others are doing in the industry. And 2, we are able to borrow those practices and implement them so that we can become competitive. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the types of HR audits. There could be others. If we read around and about HR audits, there are quite a number of other audits that we can conduct. So I want to stop there briefly and invite us to ask questions or make comments related to what we have covered. We started with an introduction, that is foundations of HR audit, and that is what we have there, HR fundamentals. Then 2, we looked at factors contributing to emergence of HR audits. 3, we have just looked at types of HR audits. So I will ask any one of us with a question or with a comment. Please go ahead. Anyone with a question or a comment to make? Eric, Sambu, if you can hear me, I can see you talking. Please, if you have a question or a comment to make, please go ahead.
No comment, sir. I'm just following what you are saying.
Thank you, Eric. Kipkirui, if you are there, please ask your question or make your comment. Benjamin? Violin? Ask your question or make a comment so that we can move on.
I think I will just make a compliment and say I'm following very closely. I'm enjoying every bit of learning. Yes, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Violin. Lastly, Irene, if you are there, please ask a question or make a comment. Irene? Then Mohammed, Abdullahi. All right. Thank you very much for your compliment and thank you for following. Let us now move to approaches to HR audit. These are frameworks that you can use to audit. Whether you are conducting compliance audit or you are conducting functional audit or any other audit that you may wish. You can choose one or a combination of these frameworks so that one, you are able to achieve your audit objectives, and two, that people are able to use it from beginning to end without confusion. The first approach is the diagnostic approach. When you talk of diagnosis, that reminds us of doctors. We visit hospitals when we are not feeling well, and the doctor conducts diagnosis. It could be a general physician, or it could be a specialist like a surgeon. In terms of HR audit, we are expected to act like doctors or surgeons. I like surgeons because of the precision with which they conduct their surgeries. That in this surgery, there is no room for error. If you juxtapose that to HR audit, we are saying that there is no room for error in conducting HR audit, so that we have a proper diagnosis of what is working and what is not, what is wrong and what is missing. And therefore, this audit becomes a health check. Health check. We are checking the health of our human resources as well as the human resource department. In this diagnosis, we are going to look at several things. One, what is going on? Two, what is wrong in terms of weaknesses or gaps? Three, what is causing the gaps or the weaknesses? And four, recommend remedies. These are suggestions for improvement. And therefore, like doctors, our HR department is our patient, and we want to conduct a diagnosis of our policies, our processes, our systems, and our procedures to find out what is wrong with them or what is missing. And in addition, we should also focus on what are our strengths and what opportunities exist. And therefore, we should not focus only on these two negatives, that what is wrong or missing. We can also find out what we are good at. That becomes our strength. Or what we are not good at, our weakness. Or what is missing, those are our gaps. In this diagnosis, we might find several ailments elements like what is wrong, what is missing, and what is not working. And we can also find our strengths. For example, when you go to a doctor, the first thing they do is to diagnose your vitals, your temperature, for example, your pressure. So in this case, we are looking at the temperature in terms of compliance with all the labor laws regulations. Temperature in terms of alignment with our corporate strategy. Temperature in terms of growth opportunities that we can take advantage of. So this diagnostic approach requires that we review all the processes, all the systems, all the procedures, and all the policies against what should be done or industry standards, because we must have a benchmark. What are we diagnosing against? Because if it's temperature, we know the standard temperature. If it is pressure, we know the standard pressure. So we must have those standards, which are benchmarks that we should use as we do the diagnosis. In diagnosis, we can use several tools, as we shall mention in the process of HR audit. These diagnostic tools help us to collect, analyze, interpret, and present data. We can use technological tools such as AI or automation of documents, or we can use manual tools. In data collection, when we are conducting a diagnosis, we can use observations, just like doctors do. They observe patients by looking at their eyes, at their noses, at their mouths, at their skin, and even temperature. So we can observe certain things that are observable in an organization. For example, in health and safety, we can do several observations as part of the diagnosis. Observe whether there is adequate lighting. 2, observe whether there is adequate space for all staff. 3, observe whether the floors and the offices are clean. 4, observe whether we have separate washrooms for gents and ladies. All those are health and safety aspects, and we can do a diagnosis by way of observation so that we can collect data that can help us to compare with the standards or benchmarks. We can observe other aspects like aspects that promote or help people with disability to navigate their way around the organization. For example, ramps. Are there ramps into buildings that can make people on wheelchairs easy to access the offices? Or lifts. Do the lifts have braille or even translators to enable people with disability like sight to find their way upstairs. So things. And that becomes a tool for diagnosis. Another tool is an interview. We conduct interviews almost throughout all the functions of HR. Starting with the recruitment, we have selection interviews. And in the HR audit, we find out what the interviews are like. Do they work well for everybody? How are they used? Are they adequate? Do they bring us the results? So we interview people during selection. We can interview people when we are conducting training needs analysis. We can ask them what kind of training they would like to go for, or what challenges they are facing, and how these challenges can be addressed by acquiring new skills and knowledge, or what type of training they could wish to undertake. So that interview becomes a diagnostic tool. And the same can happen with performance appraisals. We interview people. I am aware we may be using different types of appraisals or methods, like self-appraisal, peer appraisal, downward appraisal, parent-grandparent appraisals. In all these, we can also include interviews. If it's self-appraisal, we interview people why they gave themselves the mark or the ratings. What evidence do they have to support those ratings? What challenges they faced during that period? So those are interviews that can be conducted during performance appraisals. And they help us to identify where there are gaps. So we identify what is wrong and what is missing in all those areas. So that is a diagnostic aspect or approach. The second approach is the strategic approach. The word strategy presupposes long-term attainment of corporate objectives. It also suggests competitiveness in the market. 3, it also suggests the way we do business or how we serve our customers. So the strategic approach looks at 3 or 4 things. 1, alignment of HR function to the mission. So the first one is the mission, the purpose of the organization. Secondly, the vision, where the organization would wish to be. That dream. For example, being a market leader, that is your vision. 3, corporate objectives or strategy. That all the HR functions should be aligned or connected to those strategies. And 3, lastly, competitiveness. That strategies make an organization competitive, whether in terms of their pricing, in terms of products, in terms of their human resources, or in terms of their systems and processes. So speaking of HR audit in terms of strategic approach, we are looking at how best the HR practices, policies, and systems can help to attain corporate goals and objectives. For example, the objective of an organization is to reduce customer complaints by 70%. 70% of reduction of complaints. And then the question, you go back and ask yourself, what is the cause of this complaint? Which areas are being complained about? Take the example of recruitment and selection. Our internal customers can complain. Complain about what? I can mention one, the way in which selection is done. Two, the way in which offer letters are given. Three, the way in which people are onboarded. And four, the way in which probation period is conducted. Complaints may come from any of those areas during recruitment. So if your strategy this year is to reduce the number of complaints by 70%, then we must ensure that the HR practices in recruitment and selection are aligned by reviewing the selection process, the onboarding process, and the probation period. And that will help us improve so that we are aligned. Another approach is the comparative approach, which I mentioned earlier, talking about best practices. When we compare ourselves, we are likely to arrive at three conclusions. One, we are the best, meaning that we are above the competitors. Two, we are average, meaning that we are just like any other competitor. And three, we are below the market. That means that we are doing poorly. In areas where we are doing very well after benchmarking, which means that we are above market rate, we maintain. In areas we are average, we improve. In areas that we are below, we engineer. By engineering, we overhaul the whole system to ensure that we move from that low position to an average or even higher position in the market. So what are we benchmarking here? We are benchmarking HR practices, policies, processes, and systems. And with who are we benchmarking? Internally, we benchmark with other departments to find out what makes them the best performing department compared to HR. You may find that IT is doing very well, marketing is doing very well, production in manufacturing is doing very well, but HR is not doing very well. Why is it that other departments are doing well and not HR? So that becomes an internal comparison or benchmark. And then we can go externally, do external benchmarks. And with who do we benchmark externally? These are similar companies in the same industry. Similar. If you are in health sector, you compare yourself with Aga Khan, with the Avenue, with the Nairobi Hospital for best practices. If you are a car manufacturing company, you compare yourself with Toyota or with the Marshalls, or with General Motors. If you are a telecommunication industry or organization, you can compare yourself with Safaricom, with Airtel, or with the Telecom. Those are organizations in the same or similar industry. As a rider, when you are doing comparisons, there are two things. One, you compare yourself with those that are best in class. Best in class, meaning that they are doing very well in their products or in their employment practices, so that you want to be like them. There are some of us, for example, at universities, you may say that, take an example, just for illustration. University of Nairobi, you want to make it the Harvard of Africa. Harvard of Africa. Assuming that Harvard is the best university globally. So whatever they do to make them the best is what we want to borrow. So one thing, best of class. Secondly, customizing the best practices. Customize. Do not borrow best practices and implement them wholesale without customizing. Customizing means tailoring them to suit your situation, to suit your environment. For example, you are benchmarking yourself with the best of class in terms of training budget. The keyword there is training budget. There are some organizations that can afford 100 million shillings as a training budget. If you are a small organization, much as you want to train, your budget may not allow you that. So you customize that by saying, yes, it is good to train our employees as a best practice, but we should do this within our means. So you allocate a budget of 20 million. So you have borrowed a best practice of training all employees and then customized it in terms of budgeting. So two things when you are benchmarking or borrowing best practices. One, best of class, and two, customization. Then on statistical approach. Many of us interact accurately with the mathematics or statistics. This is about data, statistical data. And these statistics may relate to aspects like frequencies. If not frequencies, ratios. If not ratios, percentages. And then based on this data, we can establish whether we are doing well or not in relation to the various policies, practices, systems, and processes. So we can track our performance statistically in all the HR functions. For example, in recruitment and selection, what statistics do we get from this audit? One, time taken to hire. How much time does it take to hire employees? What's the average time? Two, we can measure cost of hiring. how much does it cost to hire a certain number of employees over a given period of time. So that is statistical approach in relation to recruitment. In training, we can also measure statistically our success in training. One, the completion rate of employees of a training program. How many employees started? How many employees completed successfully? Two, we can also measure the cost of training. How much did it cost to train you, all the employees within that year? So again, that is statistics used in auditing training. We can audit other functions like compensation. What are the statistics or what are the metrics in compensation? One, the cost of compensation of employees overall. How much does it cost the organization to pay its employees? Two, the cost of bonuses. How much bonuses are given within a year? Three, we can measure the ratio of compensation between male employees or female employees. Ratio, that is a statistical measure. Other functions like health and safety, we can still do statistical measures. Like which ones? One, the number of accidents that have taken place in an organization. Two, the percentage of employees who have been sick. These are the employees bringing to the offices the sick leaves or asking for permission to go and attend the doctor's appointments. So you can get the number of illness cases that is in relation to health and safety. In employee relations as a function, you can again measure that. So what are the metrics used in employee relations? One, the number of complaints against unfair treatment, number of complaints. Two, we can measure the number of strikes in a given year. How many strikes were recorded? And the strikes can be subtle or overt, depending on the level at which it is. For example, a go-slow is a form of a strike. How many go-slows did you have over the year? Two, a sit-in is a form of a strike. How many times did you have employees reporting to work and not working? Those are ways in which strikes can be expressed. Or the normal one that we know is picketing. These are demonstrations against certain practices in organizations or unfair treatments. All these relate to employee relations, and we can measure this statistically. That is a statistical approach. Specifically, we can measure the turnover rate. Turnover can be related to any of the functions we have mentioned. It can be related to recruitment. Poor recruitment can lead to turnover. Poor training can be leading to turnover. Poor performance management can lead to turnover. So turnover can be tied to any of the functions depending on our practices, our policies, and our systems. So what is the statistic or the metric related to turnover? This is the turnover rate, which is usually calculated as the number of people who have left. Divide that by the average number of employees in the organization, and then you multiply that by 100, you will get your turnover rate. That is a statistical approach. Absenteeism can also be determined statistically, and absenteeism can be looked at in two ways. One, employees not coming to the organization completely without permission. And two, employees leaving early before time. The time they are not there because they have left early is termed as absenteeism. You are not there at your station because you left early. So how do we get to know the absenteeism rate? One, the clocking in system. This clocking system can be either manual or automated, like biometrics. So through this system, we are able to know how many employees reported to work on any day, how many left early on any day. And that gives us the frequency. Why are we interested in absenteeism? It's because it affects performance. Affects performance in two ways. One, employee individual performance. That an employee is absent half of the week is not a good performer. Or two, the performance of the organization in general. As organizations, we have targets to achieve. For example, you are in an organization which sells goods, and the target could be you want to increase your sales volume by 50%. If employees are absent, you are not likely to achieve that target. And that is why we should be interested in absenteeism. Training programs have mentioned that, and all this help us to make decisions related to all the functions that we have mentioned, as well as the policies, the processes, procedures, and systems. For instance, what decision do we make related to turnover data? One, we can make a decision to review the causes of turnover so that we can retain our employees. Two, on turnover, we can make a decision to develop systems that prevent people from leaving the organization. For example, succession planning, career development, as well as competitive reward systems. So given this data, we are able to make informed decisions in relation to the types of audits that we are conducting, whether it's a functional audit, a strategic audit, a compliance audit, or cultural audit. Mathematics helps us to make informed decisions. The other approach is the compliance approach. And I've mentioned several areas of compliance, such as labor laws, industry regulations, or contracts. I've talked about labor laws and regulations. I would want to talk about contracts. Contracts are regulated under the Employment Act. And all of us have a contract of employment. which could be 1, permanent and pensionable, 2, fixed term, or 3, temporary, whichever contract. As HR managers, we must respect that contract, meaning that we should not contravene the articles contained in the contract. For instance, a permanent and a pensionable employee should not be dismissed at the whims of the manager. There must be a due process. And the due process here, depending on the offense committed, is that 1, there is a warning, which could be oral or written. 2, show cause. 3, disciplinary interview. 4, action. This action can be demotion, transfer, or even termination. For offenses that fall under summary dismissal in the Employment Act, the employee is dismissed immediately upon found guilty, and in some cases can be prosecuted. So in terms of compliance, we are looking at the contracts of employment, whether permanent and pensionable, fixed term, or temporary. Due process must be followed. Even a temporary employee should not be terminated anyhow. There must be a procedure. Many organizations lose cases because of contravention of contractual agreements. And therefore, as HR managers, we can use the compliance approach to ensure that, 1, we follow or adhere to all the labor laws, regulations, and contracts. 2, we avoid risks of lawsuits, penalties, and fines. And 3, we promote a fair and just work environment governed by law. Then very last, under approaches to HR audit, is management by objectives. This is a concept that many of us may have implemented or are implementing or would wish to implement. How does management by objectives work? This is where managers and employees sit together and set objectives and targets, and then evaluate their performance based on the level of attainment of those objectives. Level of attainment. And this can work in any of the functions that we perform. Whether it is recruitment, we can use management by objectives. Training, use MBO. Performance management, where this is commonly used, MBO. Compensation and rewards, we can use MBO. For example, let us pick training and development. So as HR managers, we conduct trainings that are aligned with the corporate objectives. So the first point of call in terms of goal setting is to look at the objectives of the organization, that is the corporate objectives. And then cascade down to our level. As HR, what is our objective that are aligned to those corporate objectives? So if the corporate objective of the organization is to increase the customer base by 5%. Increase customer base by 5%. That is the objective. Then what will be the objective of HR managers in terms of recruitment, training, performance, and others? In recruitment, we must hire qualified people who are going to market our organization to increase the number of customers. So our objective is to hire high quality employees. In training, what will be our objective, which is aligned to customers? Ensure that our training is tailored towards customer care and satisfaction. So we conduct trainings related to customer care, so that at the end of that process, we have trained employees who are going to make our customers happy. A happy customer will always come and refer others. And that becomes management by objectives. When we evaluate our performance, we shall look at the corporate objective. How many customers did we attract? And then ask ourselves at the HR level, did we achieve the objective of high quality employees during recruitment? The answer could be yes or no. Did we train employees on customer care and satisfaction? The answer could be yes or no. Where the answer is yes, we maintain the practices. Where the answer is no, we improve by way of changing the training programs or improving the recruitment and selection so that we can have the best employees who join the organization to serve our customers better. So ladies and gentlemen, those are some of the approaches that we can use to conduct HR audits. And again, they apply to all the audits that we have mentioned. They apply to all of them, whether it is functional audit, compliance audit, or cultural audit. These approaches apply. You can use one or a combination of them, depending on what works for you. Next is the core principles of HR audit. What are the principles? This could be regarded as rules of thumb or best practices that help us to conduct this process efficiently and effectively. There are many of such principles. I can mention a few. One, objectivity. That this process should not be biased and must be based on facts. Biased or biasness comes as a result of, one, lack of a standard tool to conduct the audit. Standard tool, like an interview, an observation checklist, or a questionnaire. Two, it becomes biased if we do not follow procedure. Lack of a standard operating procedure can make this process biased. Or it can also be biased because we are using our own opinions or our own backgrounds to assess what is going on. Then how do we ensure that this process is objective? One, is the application of policies uniformly. Uniform application of policies. I'll talk about bullet 2 shortly. 2, ensure that we have standard operating procedures. As I mentioned earlier, these are step-by-step methods of undertaking a task. A task like onboarding is guided by a procedure. So we use standard operating procedures to ensure that these audits are not biased. 3, we must apply our professionalism. As HR professionals, one of the ethical issues that we must practice is objectivity. That when we conduct HR audits, we should not be influenced by any other person, and that whichever decisions we make are not biased or work against an individual, which is not right. Meaning that our decisions we make as professionals must be for the general good of the organization. General good, that it means it benefits the whole organization or whole department, not an individual. So when we are conducting an HR audit, we are not going to benefit as individuals, but our departments or our organizations are going to benefit. Then lastly, this process should be fact-based, facts. They always say that facts speak for themselves. And where do we get the facts from? It is from the data that we collect. This data gives us the statistics on the basis of which we can make decisions. And these statistics are mathematicals. And they say that figures do not lie. If figures are mathematical, they are facts, and therefore they cannot lie. So as a core principle of HR audit, please be objective. Secondly is consistency. That we should apply all the policies, procedures, and systems uniformly across all functions. Across all functions in 2 ways. One, functions in HR like recruitment, training, performance, and others. Those processes and standards should apply. For example, we are conducting a process of recruitment and selection. The first step is to identify vacant positions. The second step is to requisition the position. The third step is to seek approval for those positions. The fifth step, the fourth step is to advertise, and it goes on and on until probation. That is a process. This process must be consistent. If they become inconsistent, then we are likely to skip a few steps. You can imagine if you skip a step like background check, and you end up recruiting a person to join your organization. 2 things might happen. By coincidence, they may be very good employees and perform as expected. Or secondly, that these employees might be a mess or a risk to the organization because you skipped this key step of background check. So processes must be applied uniformly so as to achieve that consistency. For standards, for example, a standard operating procedure, like performance appraisal, they should be applied to everybody. And then when we talk about cross-function, we are again talking about other departments like finance or ICT or marketing, that whatever principles or standards we apply in HR must also apply in other departments. For instance, you want to recruit a person in ICT. As HR manager, you apply all the procedures and standards so that you can get the best employee in ICT. The same with marketing. You want the best employee in marketing. So that consistency helps us to achieve two things. One, predictability, and two, reliability. If we are not consistent, then we are not reliable, we are not predictable, and we may not achieve our objectives in HR auditing. Transparency is about putting everything on the table, depending on what is being put on the table. If it is a subject of general consumption, we can put everything on the table. But if it's something that is confidential or touching on security of a country, we cannot be transparent enough to expose. However, that does not mean that we should not be clear, open, and understood by everybody. When things are clear to everybody, it becomes easy for us to function effectively. So if it is the audit criteria, let them be clear and let everybody know that they exist. And how do you make them know? It is by way of communication. Not once, not twice, but regularly. Regular communications help us to promote transparency, and that everything should be understood because we have used a language that is simple. So as a principle of HR audit, we should be transparent because there's nothing to hide. When we develop our audit tools, we seek information or data about our strengths, our weaknesses, anything that goes wrong or anything that is missing. We should be transparent. We cannot afford to sugarcoat things when they are wrong or when things are missing. If we do that, then we are setting ourselves for failure. So transparency is a key principle, and I'm sure it is one of our core values in our organizations. Let there be transparency. Another principle is accountability, where we take responsibility for two things. One, for the results we produce as individuals or as departments, and two, for the behavior of others. So responsibility is about being answerable. We are answerable for the performance of our HR departments as well as the behavior of our employees. If the behavior is bad, It means that we are failing as HR managers. Today, we talk about people and culture managers. If we are culture managers, then the behaviors we inculcate in our people should be the right ones. If culture consists of values, norms, and beliefs, then it's our responsibility to ensure that we promote those values which guide behavior. So HR audit helps us to expose some of the weaknesses that may exist, and we take responsibility for what is going on. And we are also responsible for results. Results can be poor or good. If they are good, we celebrate ourselves. And that's why we reward ourselves as HR managers or as organizations. We celebrate. So accountability is key in HR audit, that if the audit results show whatever they are, then we are accountable for those results. Confidentiality is another core principle of value. And I want to address myself to the provisions of the Data Protection Act 2019. There are two key players in this Data Protection Act. One, the data handlers, and two, the data owners. The data handlers are the organizations or its representatives. And the data owners are the employees who work in the organization or customers. This data can be confidential and therefore should be treated as such. A breach of confidential data may lead to fines, penalties, or lawsuits. And that goes back to the element of compliance. Compliance with the Data Protection Act. Sensitive data may relate to the following. One, the salaries of employees. This is private information. Two, health status of the employees. This is private information. Three, marital status. This is private, unless the employee is willing to share. Four, number of children. That is private and is a sensitive issue. Sensitive because there are others who don't have children and they would have wished to have children. And therefore, when you expose them that they don't have children, then they feel bad about it. So sensitivity is very important to any confidential information. So such confidentiality clauses must always be signed. As we shall discuss in the next few minutes, we will be creating an audit team. These are people that will be conducting the audit. And part of the requirement is that they will sign a confidentiality clause that any sensitive information they will gather will be kept confidentially. Otherwise, we will lose trust, and in some cases, we might be sued. And that is a cost to the organization. So confidentiality is important, and everybody involved in this audit process must ensure that all confidential information is kept. Lastly is continuous improvement. That this audit is not a one-off thing. It is a continuous process. As I indicated earlier, we can work together with the internal auditors so that as internal audit, we also have a tool that will assess the HR function compliance or strategic audits. That through these regular audits, we are able to identify several things. One, emerging issues. Two, weaknesses or gaps. And three, changes in our environment. Because of those emerging issues, because of those changes, we are able to identify new policies, new processes, new procedures, and new systems, which are at the core of HR audit. And therefore, we should make this HR audit a regular thing. It can start immediately in this coming second quarter if you are working in public, or you can begin in January, or coincide it with an organizational event so that you can launch this audit. So the choice is ours. Those are the principles of HR audit. And with that, I wish to move to the next part, and that is benefits of HR auditing, so that we can make progress. In one way or another, I have already mentioned them, but for purposes of clarity, I want to mention them one by one, as I have done with other areas. One, it helps us to comply with the labor laws, with our own policies, and with industry regulations. What is the main reason for complying? It is to avoid lawsuits, avoid penalties, and avoid fines. These are all expensive. So when we audit, we ensure compliance to avoid those losses. Secondly is mitigating risks. By mitigation, we mean reducing the impact of those risks. Whether they are lawsuits, legal risks, financial risks, operational risks, or even reputational risks. I've already talked about legal risks, which include lawsuits, fines, and penalties. For financial risks, this is loss of money. We can lose money when performing any of the functions of HR. Like which one? In recruitment and selection, we can lose money by advertising in the wrong media. In training and development, we can lose money by training the wrong person. In performance management, we can lose money by skipping certain processes. In health and safety, we can lose money because of illnesses and accidents. So when we audit all these functions, at the back of our minds, we are thinking about financial losses. Other risks could include reputation. we all have a reputation to protect at two levels. One, individual level as HR managers, and two, organizational level. At the individual level, we want to protect our integrity. We don't want our integrity to be questioned. And that is why we need to be transparent, as I mentioned in one of the principles. So our reputation is key as individual HR managers. We don't want people to start questioning that we are biased, that we are not truthful, that we are mistreating people. That is our reputation at risk if we do negative things. At the organizational level, we are looking at the brand image. Our organizations want to protect their names. And the name here is quality customer service. 2, quality hires. 3, environmental protection. For example, we are talking about green recruitment and selection, green training and development, green performance management. Why green? Because we want to protect our environment. And how do we protect our environment? Is by reducing pollution. So how do we reduce pollution in recruitment? We conduct online interviews so that people don't have to travel because vehicles use oil which pollutes our environment, or engage in lengthy manual processes which require paperwork. So we should automate some of the processes in recruitment and selection instead of having people to print their CVs, their application letters, or their. So green environment is a reputation. And therefore, by conducting HR audits, we are able to identify risks, prioritize those risks, and take remedial measures. The other benefit is improved efficiency, where we are streamlining operations and eliminating costs. Streamlining operations like recruitment, we can do that by automating. Streamlining learning and development, we can automate that by using LMS, that is learning management systems. We can also streamline performance management by using performance management systems so that our data is accurate, our data is factual, and that our data has integrity. About cost is about the time taken and the amount of money spent. So we can reduce our expenditures in training, in performance management, or any other function. So when we conduct an audit, we improve efficiency in recruitment, in training, in performance, and other areas. The other benefit is strategic alignment. I've said that if we don't align ourselves, we are likely to achieve a strategic drift. A drift is a deviation from the direction we were taking. What provides direction? 3 things. 1, the vision. 2, objectives. And 3, strategies. If we deviate from the vision and strategies, then we are in big trouble. Can you imagine you are in this ship that has deviated from its direction. Soon or later, it will be hitting the corals. The ship will capsize. As HR managers, we do not want to be blamed for capsizing the ship. We want the ship to steer in the right direction. And for that reason, we must align all our policies, practices, systems to our strategic direction, the mission, corporate objectives, and strategy. The other benefit is enhanced employee satisfaction. We all know that an employee who is satisfied is 1, high performing, 2, engaged, and 3, likely to remain in the organization. So we conduct HR audits. We are likely to identify those weaknesses and the gaps and take corrective measures so that our employees are satisfied. And we can determine employee satisfaction by conducting satisfaction surveys. These are researches conducted to find out how engaged the employees are, how happy they are with their jobs, with their pay, and with their organization. Lastly, another benefit is performance improvement. We improve performance in 2 areas. 1, as individual HR managers, and 2, as a department. And by extension, we improve the performance of the organization. So by connecting all the HR practices to organizational outcomes, we shall be said to be successful. What are the challenges that face HR auditing? And as you get this certificate, you will be conducting HR audits, or you have been doing that, and I'm sure several challenges will arise. One challenge which is common in any process is resistance. In some cases, the HR audit may propose several changes. These changes may not be welcome or palatable to some of our employees, especially when they are not sure the benefits of the changes, or the changes are likely to affect them negatively. So resistance comes in because they are not sure of what will happen, or they fear that the changes is likely to affect them negatively. So as a manager, you can reduce the resistance, 1, by involving all the stakeholders, 2, by communicating in advance, and 3, by using change agents. Secondly is data inaccuracy, especially organizations that are using manual records. These records may be incomplete or may be having errors. And the end result is that we also make errors in our final decisions after the audit. In order to overcome this challenge, we are advised to use automated systems where we automate performance, automate training, automate recruitment. Because by automating, we reduce inaccuracies. If it is incomplete records, we should audit our physical or manual records. Look at them piece by piece and identify where there are gaps, and then take corrective action. Budget is also another challenge, that this process requires money. It also requires qualified personnel. In the absence of money and qualified personnel, we are likely to hit the headwinds because we may not be able to conduct this audit successfully. Time. As we progress through this course, when you schedule this HR audit, you must take into consideration the time requirement. Time is an investment, and therefore we should look at the time required to conduct these audits. To be on the safe side, especially for those organizations internal audit, please borrow a best practice from the internal auditors so that you don't take inordinate amounts of time. 2, conduct this audit. So it must be timely. It must start on time and end on time. Another challenge is complexity. There are many things that come into operation or consideration when we are conducting audit. For example, you are conducting several types of audits like compliance audit, functional audit, or cultural audit. These are many audits that make this process complex. And even when we are reporting, the complexity of networks among those core audits can also become a challenge. To overcome that, make it as simple as possible, and if possible, conduct one audit at a time, if possible. And lastly, change management. Managing change is not easy for everybody. There are many people who face challenges in managing change. The way you introduce this change will carry the day. HR audit will propose several changes. For example, change in policy, change in systems, change in processes, which are likely to affect the operations of employees. So how do you implement change? Just like in any other system, there are 4 options or 5. 1, parallel implementation. 2, piecemeal implementation. 3, phased implementation. And 4, piloted implementation. So depending on what is being implemented after the audit, you can opt to use any of that. If you are going to automate your documents, for example, and develop a document management system, you need to pilot test this as part of implementation, or do it in phases so that you don't shock the system. In some cases, you can also do parallel implementation, where the old system is running along the new one. So in that case, you will be safe. Safe because if the new system fails to work, you have the old one to rely on. Audit process. I had indicated earlier that I will be discussing the process of auditing, and I'm making good my threat. The first thing you do is to plan the audit. What do you need to do here? Determine the purpose. Purpose here refers to why you are conducting this audit. It could be to improve efficiency of our system. It could be to cut cost. It could be to enhance competitiveness. So whichever purpose you choose must come out clearly in the planning. Scope. These are the areas you are going to cover. If it is functional audit, what are you going to cover? Like recruitment, training, performance. If it is compliance audit, you are looking at the labor laws, such as Employment Act, Labor Relations Act, Labor Institutions Act, WIBA, and OSHA. That will be your scope. If it is strategic audit, what will be your scope? The mission, vision, corporate objectives, and strategy. You can also plan for objectives. What are you going to achieve at the end of this process? If it is cost effectiveness, that should come out as a clear objective. Then talking of criteria for evaluation or audit, these are the standards that you are going to use. These standards are contained in 3 areas. 1, your policies. 2, the labor laws. And 3, industry standards. This will be your criteria for audit. So you look at this criteria. Then the timelines. This is when to start and when to stop. And two, the amount of time required to conduct this audit. Still on planning, you should identify resources that will go into this audit. There are three resources: one, financial; two, physical, like offices and the computers; and then three, human resources. These are the people that you are going to work with. And then lastly, you assemble the audit team. This audit team will contain several people. One, the team leader. Two, the chairperson. Three, the secretary to take the minutes in case you have meetings. And four, responsibilities of each team member. So you should plan this audit team. Secondly, you need to prepare based on the plan. And these preparations will relate to assembling of relevant policies, laws, manuals, and organizational resources, and then communicate. Without these preparations, we are likely to start firefighting. If you don't assemble all relevant policies, during audit, you might find that they are not there. And then you start scrambling and looking for policies that you should have prepared. After preparation, then the hard part begins, that is collecting data. You can collect data through interviews, through observations, through questionnaires, among other tools. Be sure to design your tool based on your scope. The tool must reflect the scope. If it is a recruitment and selection, rather functional audit, the interview should cover all the functions. If it is a compliance audit, the interview or a tool should cover all the labor laws so that we don't leave anything out in our audit. Then after the field work, you have collected your data, the next step is to analyze. I'm sure all of us have done data analysis or have conducted research before, especially academic research. After collecting your data, you analyze it either quantitatively or qualitatively. This analysis should be related to the areas of audit, and that is your scope, areas of audit. Madam Mura, I can see your hand up. If you have a question or a comment to make, please go ahead. Okay, thank you. So this analysis is quantitative or qualitative, depending on the area of audit. There are some areas that are fairly non-quantifiable, especially behaviors such as honesty. It is not possible to make a quantitative analysis using aspects like satisfaction. You can only use a Likert scale. Then after that, you need to report your findings. At the end of this course, I will be showing a template demonstrating the content of your report, such as the cover page, the executive summary, terms of reference, your findings, your recommendations, and then your monitoring and evaluation. And then after reporting, you need to identify those recommendations and develop action plans. These action plans, for them to be actionable, must have the following. One, the area being audited. 2, the gaps identified. 3, the recommended action. 4, the person responsible. 5, the time required. And lastly, the resources required. An action plan should have all those key elements. And then lastly, in this process, you need to make a follow-up. As I indicated, one of the principles of HR audit is continuous improvement. And you can only do that if you monitor the progress of your audit based on the implementations, so that you identify emerging issues and then take corrective measures where necessary. Then the second part of the third and last part of our presentation today is the audit roles. The first one was foundations of HR audit. The second one is the process of HR audit. And the third one is the audit roles and the ethics. As I indicated, roles refer to the various offices and what they are likely to do in this process. These are the responsibilities of various people who will be engaged in this process. Starting with us, the HR managers or HR officers. What are we expected to do? What will be our role in conducting HR audit? 1, provide policies. We are the custodians of HR policies. And when need arises, we should provide them. These policies must be relevant, must be accurate, and must be updated. Do not present a policy that is not updated. Because if you do that, then again, that becomes an audit query that our policies are not updated. But again, what is the audit for? It is there to audit policies. If you present policies that are not updated, then we should update them in our recommendations. Secondly is data. Any data related to recruitment, training, performance, compensation, and others. For instance, data on promotion. We should provide data on who has been promoted, to which positions, what are their qualifications, and what are their current qualifications, so that when we assess the succession plans, we are able to determine whether those people who succeed others are potential or have been promoted based on somebody's emotions or feelings or relationships. And then lastly, as HR managers, we must ensure that everybody in the department cooperates. So how do we do this? 1, ensure that you communicate to them about this audit. 2, engage them in this process from the beginning. And 3, ensure that everybody knows their role so that you can get maximum cooperation. Secondly, internal or external auditors. I have indicated before that as a starting point, please work closely with the internal audit team. They will give you insights on how to conduct this audit, when, and even preparation of the tool. So what is the role of these people? Is to provide those independent reviews. It has been argued before that if we conduct HR audits ourselves, we are likely to be biased. That independence disappears. We need somebody from outside to give an independent opinion about what we are doing, how, where, and when. With these internal auditors, we are likely to get an independent view of what is going on. But that does not mean that as HR managers or a department, we cannot conduct it in a way that is objective. Yes, we can. By using standard criteria and by using SOPs, we should be able to audit our functions objectively. The other role for external or internal auditors is to identify gaps and make recommendations for improvement. As I said, gaps are aspects that are missing in our policies, missing in our procedures, missing in our systems, or missing in our culture. So we identified these gaps and make recommendations. These recommendations must be objective, not because you want to gain from them. Very objective recommendations which are actionable. Then the other role is top management. What are they expected to do? Is to provide the unreserved support. Support in terms of, one, their personal time. Two, resource allocations. And three, strategy. They should provide their support in terms of those three things. And even when it comes to recommendations, they should be able to support the recommendations, especially those recommendations that are useful for the organization. Another role is the employees. What is their role? Is to provide feedback, especially when we are conducting the interviews or doing observations, or when we are giving them those questionnaires. Their participation is very important because we need them to give us this information. We cannot rely on documented records only. There are issues that are undocumented, which employees can provide. And on the part of the employees, they should then follow the recommendations. What has been suggested must be implemented. So the employees must implement the recommendation. How about compliance officers? In our system or in our organizations, we have compliance officers such as legal officers or quality controllers or quality officers. What is their role here? They give their legal opinion or expert opinion and ensure that whatever we do in terms of policies, practices, and procedures are in compliance. Compliance with the labor laws, compliance with regulations, and compliance with industry standards. So compliance officers play a big role by ensuring that everybody is adhering to or with the policies, the laws, and industry regulations. Then the audit committee. There are two audits that we are likely to have here. One, the internal audit committee, and two, the internal HR audit team. They should work together. So in terms of their roles is to ensure transparency, and the transparency is one of the principles we mentioned here. Accountability, they are responsible for the results and the behaviors. and then they also review the audit actions recommended. Then strategic HR audit roles, that when you conduct this audit, what's the role of this audit process? One is talent management. I can summarize talent management in 3 words. Then is two, workforce planning. Recruitment. Must be aligned. Performance are all. And again, this HR adequate strategies. Competitive. Sorry, I muted my mic. Lastly, we want to close this by looking at elements of an effective audit process. We must exercise independence. We must be transparent. We must be fair by ensuring that we apply all the laws equitably. We must also ensure that we comply with the professional codes of conduct. And lastly, if there is any whistleblowing to be done, please blow the whistle where there are unethical practices. Lastly, what's the future of HR audit? One, we are going to look at the global standards. Sorry. Work with a diverse So on that note, I want us to conclude this program this morning. And if anybody has a question or a comment to make about our training, please go ahead so that we can close. Anybody with a question or a comment to make, please go ahead so that we can close. Frida, if you are there, please make your comment. Okay, Benjamin Kisang, please go ahead with your comment or your question.
Thank you, Mwalimu, for the presentation. I think it was very insightful, and we've learned a few things. I would have a question that related to compliance,
yes,
especially on recruitment. What is the best practice that one can use when you've employed employees you engage employees on a contract? So they say one year contract or 2 year or 1 year contract, and you want to convert now to P&P. What's the best procedure? That's the best practice that one can use to convert.
Okay, thank you very much, Benjamin. The best practice is that you conduct a performance audit of the employees, those with the potential. And that means that you conduct a performance appraisal so that you can see potential to perform well, that you can confirm them. 2, you can also look at the disciplinary cases of all the employees so that you don't confirm a person who is likely to have problems with you in future. And 3, you look at those people with leadership potential so that when they join you as permanent and pensionable employees, they are able to grow with you as an organization and also grow their careers. And in the process, they will help you to achieve your corporate objectives. So 3 things: One, do a performance appraisal to identify those people with high potential for performance. Two, look at their records in terms of discipline. And three, look at their leadership potential. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So if there is no question, I want us to stop there. Thank you very much for your participation. I look forward to seeing you again today in the afternoon at 2. May God bless you. Bye for now.